On my final breath, the air was cold, carrying the taste of cheap coal dust and despair. The heat in the rental apartment had been off for 3 days. I was wrapped in the only quilt I had, and the last message on my phone was the landlord urging me to pay the rent. No heat, no warmth, just that ice-cold rent reminder blinking on the screen. I didn't cry. Instead, I suddenly remembered that afternoon 5 years ago. Derek stood at the entrance of the cafe, clutching a crumpled business plan, and asked me, "Iris, are you really not investing?" I said no. I was scared back then. That 100,000 was all I had saved, I couldn't afford to lose it. Later, his company was acquired at a valuation of $1.2 billion. Lying on that cold bed, I thought, if I had dared to take a gamble back then, would my whole life be different? Then I opened my eyes. On the desk lay a year-end bonus notice, 100,000 yuan. The calendar read, January 14, 2019. Morning light slanted through the gaps in the blinds, falling onto that paper like a scorching talisman pressed in my palm. I was 25. I had come back. I stared at that string of numbers, my fingers trembling. I spent the entire afternoon completely stripping away the memory of waiting to die in that rental house in my past life. I wasn't back to continue fate, I was back to rewrite it. A post popped up on my phone, sent by Derek, tomorrow at 2 p.m., Blue Bay Coffee. Everyone is welcome to the roadshow. Time, tomorrow. I gripped my phone tightly and laughed until tears came. This time, I'm not waiting for anyone. The next day at 1:30 p.m., I stood at the entrance of Blue Bay Coffee. In my past life, I didn't come. That day, I hesitated all night and ended up locking it in a fixed deposit, 3 years, at 3.85% interest. Now, I push open the glass door. The cafe is sparsely occupied with a dozen or so people. Derek stands in front of the projection screen, the collar of his shirt frayed at the edges, his shoes polished pale but the soles worn thin. His PowerPoint looks especially shabby, and he is awkwardly explaining a formatting issue. The people around him wear that contemptuous arrogance in their eyes, the look of those who have already reaped the benefits. He sees me and freezes for a moment. "Iris? I'm here for the roadshow." He quickly came to his senses and promptly grabbed a chair. Someone nearby muttered under their breath, "Who's this? Doesn't look like he's from the industry." I ignored it. My past life memories told me Derek's project was called Glimmer, a community group buying platform targeting the downmarket. In 6 months, it would be acquired by a leading platform for $120 million in valuation. Right now, he needed $500,000 in seed funding, offering 10% equity. I had $100,000 on hand. Not enough, but enough to leverage. Derek's pitch was amateurish, 3 slides, all data filled in by hand. But I knew those numbers were real. In 3 months, his daily orders would surge from 300 to 8,000. The pitch ended, and the crowd dispersed. I walked straight up to Derek. "I'm investing 100,000, not for equity but for convertible bonds." His eyes widened. "Convertible bonds? You know about that?" In the months before my death in my past life, I had nothing to do, so I watched every investment course I could find on my phone. That knowledge couldn't save my life, but right now, it was exactly what I needed. 8% annual interest, conversion within 18 months, with the conversion valuation calculated at 80% of the post-money valuation of this round. If you get acquired, I have the right to participate in the distribution on a pro rata basis. Derek opened his mouth, and it took him a while before he said, "What do you do for a living?" "Clerical work," I said with a smile. "But that's not important. What matters is that you need money, and I have money. We'll sign the agreement tomorrow." He stared at me for a long time, then finally nodded. Stepping out of the cafe, the cold wind rushed down my collar. I took a deep breath. Step 1, completed. The phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "Iris? Heard you went to the Blue Bay Coffee Roadshow today?" I stared at the screen for a few seconds before recognizing the number. Julian. The youngest partner in the venture capital circle, managing a $300 million fund at just 26. In my past life, he had also shown up at Blue Bay Coffee that day, but I didn't go, so I had never met him. I replied with a single word, "Yeah." He responded instantly, "Investing 100K in community group buying? Amateurs jumping on the bandwagon should know their limits." I stared at the line of text, slowly typing out my reply. Mr. Julian, you sure get your news fast. What, afraid a layman like me might snatch your project? You manage 300 million, relying on economies of scale. I manage 100,000, playing with a life or death logic. Our risk tolerance isn't the same, you haven't figured out this game yet. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, a period came back. I slipped my phone into my pocket and smiled. In my past life, I didn't dare mess with anyone. In this life, I might as well start right here with this guy to sharpen my skills. On the third day after signing the agreement with Derek, Julian asked to meet me at a cafe in Guamau. He was younger than I expected. In a dark gray coat with understated silver cufflinks, he sat upright, exuding an aura that said, "Whatever I say, you should listen." That composure belonged to a ruler. "Iris, little Iris," he stirred his coffee. "I'll be direct. I've been looking at Derek's project too, but I'm planning to back out." "So you're here to persuade me to back out as well?" "Let me tell you, don't waste your money." He lifted his eyes to look at me, a condescending pity in his gaze. "In the community group buying space, at least 20 competitors will flood in within 6 months. Derek's team has no technological moat, and their supply chain relies entirely on connections. They won't survive 2 rounds of funding." I knew what he was saying was partially true. In my past life, Shimmer had indeed been acquired in the 6th month, but not because it couldn't hold on, it was because Derek had chosen to cash out. He used that money to start a second project, which was valued at $4 billion 3 years later. But I couldn't say any of that. "Mr. Julian," I picked up my coffee and took a sip. "What you see is financial data. What I see is a fulfillment bottleneck." I spread out the competitor analysis chart, covered in red marks from countless revisions, that I had brought with me. Neighborhood Select is burning through money too fast. Once order volume hits a certain threshold, their central warehouse will collapse. By then, your Series B funds will just be the lifeline they need to survive. He set down the silver spoon, and for the first time, that playful disdain ebbed from his eyes, replaced by a cold, appraising gaze fixed on his opponent. "You're quite interesting," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But this kind of armchair intuition is worthless in the capital market. Then let's see whether your model or my luck proves more accurate." I stood up. I didn't look back. It's not that I don't want to turn back, it's that I'm afraid he'll notice my palms are dripping with sweat. 100,000 yuan, a fixed deposit in my past life, now I'll bet on a 25-year-old entrepreneur in this one. To say I'm not scared would be a lie. But stronger than fear is that feeling, I'm alive. Truly alive. Not the 30-year-old waiting to die in a rented apartment, but 25-year-old Iris, still with chips in hand. In the days that followed, I started frequenting various small investor salons and roadshows. Not to find projects, but to find people. In my past life, I took many investment courses, and one sentence stood out the most: investing isn't about investing in projects, it's about investing in people. Derek was a good entrepreneur, but he needed someone to manage his money, his books, and his compliance. I found Mira. She was my college roommate, working as an auditor at an accounting firm at the time, clocking in overtime until 2 a.m. every day, with a monthly salary of 8,000. I treated her to a hot pot. "Quit your job. Come work with me." Her hand, holding a piece of tripe, froze midair. "Are you crazy? I've invested in a project and need someone who can handle the books and keep an eye on the supply chain. I'll offer you a monthly salary of 12,000, plus 0.5% equity in Glimmer." "Where did you get the money?" "Year-end bonus." She put down her chopsticks and looked at me seriously. "Iris, did something happen that's got you rattled?" I thought about it for a moment and said, "Sort of. I had a really long dream. In the dream, I was 30 years old and died in a rented apartment." She thought I was joking and called me crazy with a laugh. But 3 days later, she still quit. Wei Guang's office was in a 40-square-meter commercial residential unit outside the 5th Ring Road. 4 of us crowded around a long table to work. Derek handled product and offline promotion, his tech partner, Vince, was in charge of mini-program development, Mira managed finance and supply chain, and I took care of everything external, finding money, people, and resources. In March 2019, Wei Guang's daily orders exceeded 500. Derek excitedly sent a red packet in the group chat. Mira grabbed 2 cents and 7 tenths, cursing him for being stingy. I grabbed 1 cent and 3 tenths. 1,000 times happier than in my previous life. In April, daily orders surged to 1,200. I started frequently contacting local community group leaders, using the operational strategies I'd learned from my past life to help Derek refine his offline promotion pitch. In May, 8,000. Derek stared at the back-end data, his hands trembling. Iris, how on earth did you come up with this model of leveraging group leaders for viral growth? I dreamed it, I said. He thought I was joking. In early June, a managing director from a leading community group buying platform proactively contacted Derek. The acquisition offer arrived, a valuation of $120 million, all-cash acquisition, with the core team staying on for 2 years. It was exactly the same as in the previous life. Derek asked me, Iris, should we sell? In the previous life, he sold. Then he used that money to start a second project, which succeeded. But in this life, I said, no. He froze. We're not asking for a $120 million exit, we want a seat at the table. I looked him in the eyes. Derek, what you lack isn't money. It's a backer. I'll find you one. That night, I dialed a number. Julian picked up, his voice heavy with sleep. Who's this? Iris. You said Twilight can't survive 2 rounds of funding. Want to make a bet? What bet? Within 3 months, Twilight's valuation triples. If you lose, you lead the series a round at a pre-money valuation of $80 million. If you win, I'll transfer all my convertible bonds to you, not a single cent. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Iris, are you serious? I never joke. He hung up. I didn't think he'd reply. But at 9 the next morning, I received his message, the bet is on. Also, there's a clause flaw in your convertible bond agreement, I suggest you add a liquidation preference. I stared at this message for a long time. He was helping me. A man who called me an amateur was helping an amateur patch a loophole. I couldn't quite name what I felt. But one thing was certain, I was going to win this bet. Julian was right, my convertible bond agreement did have a flaw. Mira stayed up all night to add the liquidation preference and anti-dilution clauses. Derek read it and frowned, why are you even beating me on the details? Because I have less money than you, I said. He didn't argue, just scratched his head and laughed. Over the next 2 months, I began executing the strategy one remembered from my past life, community leader fission. But unlike before, I avoided several pitfalls in advance. In my previous life, Welight lost 2 community leaders during its rapid expansion, both because the supply chain couldn't keep up, leading to delayed fulfillment and mass refunds from users. This time, the day my order volume hit 5,000, I pulled Mira aside and built a leader tier system, dividing them into 3 grades, A, B, and C, based on their fulfillment capacity. Grade C leaders had their authority reduced, Grade B was throttled, and only Grade A got access to platform traffic. Derek thought I was overcomplicating things. It wasn't until mid-July, when a competitor in the neighboring city shut down overnight due to fulfillment collapse, that he looked at me with a chill running down his spine. How did you know? Trends, I said. In community group buying, whoever runs fast wins, but whoever runs steady lives long. In August, Weiguang's daily orders stabilized at 15,000, covering 3 cities, with the number of group leaders surpassing 400. The acquirer came again, offering $200 million. Derek asked me once more if I wanted to sell. I shook my head. But deep down, I knew the real test was coming soon. In early September, Julian asked to meet me in his office. On the 42nd floor of China World Tower Phase 3, the floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the entire CBD skyline. I stood by the window, watching the dense streams of cars crawling below like ants. Iris, he leaned on the desk, twirling a pen in his hand. I've looked at the Glimmer data. It did exceed my expectations. So, do you plan to concede? No. He set the pen down. But you didn't win this round by luck, it was strategy. I'm wondering, where did you, a clerk, come up with this kind of strategy? I turned to look at him. His gaze was direct, like a scalpel. Mr. Julian, are you more concerned about where my strategy comes from, or whether it can make you money? He laughed. Not the polite smile of social occasions, but genuinely amused. Both. Then I'll only answer the second, it can. And it's not just Glimmer. I have other projects too. He raised an eyebrow. You're trying to get me to invest in something else? I'm not pulling you into anything, I'm giving you a choice. I took a list out of my bag and handed it to him. It outlined 5 directions: community group buying, pet food, the silver economy, second-hand luxury goods trading, and niche fragrance brands. From 2019 to 2024, in my past life, each of these 5 directions produced at least one company valued at over $1 billion. I remembered the names and founders of 4 of them, only the 5th, niche fragrances, was a trend I had identified without a specific target in mind. Julian stared at it for a long time. Your judgment of market trends is very accurate, he said, but you missed one thing. What? Do you have the money to invest? Right to the point. Microlight's 100,000 convertible bonds haven't been converted yet, and I have less than 20,000 yuan left in my pocket. Myra's salary was drawn in advance from the convertible bonds, something Derek doesn't know about. That's why I came to you, I said. Mr. Julian, you're not betting on whether I'll win. You're betting on whether I'm worth investing in. He was silent for a moment. Seraph's Series A round, I'll lead the investment, pre-money valuation of 80 million, just as we agreed. He paused. But there's a condition. What condition? You join my fund as an investment advisor. No need to come into the office, but I want your opinion on every project. I hadn't expected him to bring that up. Why? Because there's no one like you on my team, he said, his tone flat, as if stating a fact. They can read financial models, but they can't read people. You're the opposite. I looked into his eyes, trying to find something, a test? A calculation? Or just pure curiosity? There was nothing to be read. Okay, I said. He reached out his hand. I shook it. His hand was dry, the palm slightly warm. In that moment, I thought of myself at 30 in my past life, lying in that cold rental room without even a single hand to hold mine. Now, at 25, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows on the 42nd floor, shaking hands with the sharpest investor in the city, at peace with our deal. Outside the window, the sunset had set the entire CBD ablaze in gold. The day the Microlight series of funding landed in the account, Derek sent a firework emoji in the group chat. Mira replied with a string of ellipses. My convertible note was converted into equity according to the agreement, post-money valuation was 80 million, and I held 1.25%. It didn't sound like much, but that 100,000 yuan had turned into 1 million. Paper profit, 900,000. I haven't cashed out. Julian once said something that stuck with me: the biggest problem for poor people isn't that they have no money, it's that once they have money, they want to spend it. So I treated that 900,000 in unrealized gains as the capital for my next move. In October 2019, I started executing the second project on my list, pet food. In my previous life, I remembered a brand called Furry Baby that made fresh pet food. Its founder was a post-90s woman named Serena. After the pandemic broke out in 2020, the pet economy grew against the trend. Furry Baby secured a Series B round and was valued at 800 million. But right now, it was October 2019. Serena's team had only 3 people, the product was still in testing, and they hadn't even raised an angel round yet. I found her through an alumni group. We met at a cat cafe. Serena was wearing a plaid shirt, her hair casually tied up, with traces of pigment from lab experiments still stuck under her nails. Beside her crouched a golden retriever, gnawing intently on a chew stick. Serena, I've seen your product. The formula is fine, but the packaging and brand positioning need adjustments, I said straight to the point. She looked at me warily. You're an investor? Sort of. I want to invest in your angel round. How much? 200,000, for 8%. She was stunned for a moment. 200,000? I knew what she was thinking. 200,000 is too little for financing, most angel rounds start at least at 500,000. But I wasn't betting on the amount, I was betting on speed. 200,000 is enough for you to run for 3 months. In 3 months, your product can go live, and the data can get rolling. By then, I'll help you connect with Series A, and the valuation will at least quintuple. How can you be sure? Because the fresh pet food track is going to explode next year, I said. Do you believe it or not? She stared at me for a long time, then finally extended her hand. Deal. After leaving the cat cafe, I sent Julian a message, second project, fresh pet food, invested 200,000. He replied quickly, your own money? Yeah. The shares from Wagwong didn't move? No. So how much do you have left now? I calculated, less than 10,000. He didn't reply. 10 minutes later, a transfer of 50,000 yuan arrived in my Alipay account. Note, prepaid 3 months consulting fees. I stared at that money for a long time. He didn't need to prepay me. The 3-month consulting fee, per the contract, was due at the end of the month. He could have easily waited until I had worked for a full month before sending it. This money was his gesture. I accepted it. Then replied with 3 words, I'll pay it back. He responded, no need. Just give me a share when you profit. In November 2019, Glimmer city coverage expanded to 8 cities, and daily orders surpassed 30,000. Julian brought in his post-investment team to help Derek set up a proper financial system and supply chain management system. For the first time, Derek had his own private office. Standing there, touching the brand new desk, he suddenly said, Iris, sometimes I feel like you're pushing me forward. It's not me pushing you, I said. You were meant to run this fast all along. He smiled, revealing his canine teeth. At that moment, I felt a sudden daze. Did Derek from my past life ever wear such a smile after being acquired? Probably not. In that life, he took the money, started a second project, and succeeded, but throughout it all, there was no Iris, no Mira. He ran that race alone. This life was different. In December, news of a mysterious pneumonia outbreak in Wuhan began circulating within the industry. Most people paid it no mind, but I knew deep down, a storm was coming. I did 2 things. First, I had Derek stockpile 3 months' worth of protective supplies and disinfection materials in advance, while also rolling out a contactless delivery feature. Second, I had Serena's Pet Fresh Food brand set up an online sales channel ahead of time, suspending all offline promotions. Julian asked me why. Instinct, I said. He glanced at me and didn't press further. But 3 days later, he had all the companies his fund had invested in draw up emergency plans. He later told me that was the best blind decision he had ever made. In January 2020, the pandemic struck. Everything unfolded just as I had foreseen in my past life. Thanks to the early launch of contactless delivery, Microlight's order volume rose instead of falling, surging from 30,000 to 80,000 daily orders within 2 months. Community group buying became one of the most essential services during the pandemic, with capital pouring in. Serena's Pet Fresh Food brand also experienced countercyclical growth. Home isolation gave pet owners more time to focus on their pets' diets, and online sales quadrupled. Most of the companies Julian had invested in, those that had prepared emergency plans, managed to weather the chaotic first 2 months. The look in his eyes changed. No longer an interesting outsider, but something closer to regard. But what truly created a rift between Julian and me was something that happened in March. A community group buying project called Neighborhood Select entered its Series B round, with Julian's fund leading the investment. This project directly competed with WeLight in 3 cities. Julian voted in favor at the investment committee meeting. He didn't tell me in advance. I found out from Derek. He was so flustered on the phone that he could barely speak coherently. Iris, Julian invested in our competitor. Isn't he supposed to be our investor? I was silent for a long time. I understand. After hanging up the phone, I went straight to Julian's office. When he saw me, he put down the papers in his hand. You're here? Why didn't you tell me about Neighborhood Premium? Conflict of interest, he said. I'm an A-round investor in Gleam, and the lead investor in B-round for Neighborhood Premium. These 2 projects are in the same track. I can't give up the investment opportunity in Neighborhood Premium just because of Gleam. The fund's money belongs to the LPs, not to me. But you're not obligated to invest in 2 directly competing companies at the same time. I'm obligated to make money for the fund. He stood up and walked to the window. Iris, you're very smart, but you have blind spots. Your judgment on trends is accurate, and your judgment of people is spot on, but you treat business like it's personal. Gleamlight and Neighbor Choice aren't an issue between you and me, they're two separate investments. Then should I also treat my investment advisory contract as a separate transaction? I said. He turned around and looked at me. What do you mean by that? I mean, if you can invest in my competitor, I can invest in yours too. He narrowed his eyes. I turned and walked away. Over the next 2 weeks, I did the boldest thing I've ever done in my life. I took out a secured loan against my stake in Wigwam equity, and combined with Serena's investment returns, her angel round of $200,000 had grown to $800,000 as the brand's valuation rose. I scraped together $1.2 million to invest in a project Julian was competing for. A second-hand luxury goods trading platform called Old Times. In the previous timeline, this company was valued at $1.5 billion in 2022, and Julian's fund got in during the Series A, earning 7 times their money. In this timeline, I beat him to it. The founder Leo is a post-90s guy I met through Serena. He has a deep understanding of the second-hand luxury goods industry, but lacks funding and operational experience. I gave him $1.2 million, on the condition that he cannot accept any investment from Julian's fund. Leo hesitated for 3 days before finally agreeing. When the news reached Julian's ears, he called me directly. "Iris, you did that on purpose." "Mr. Julian," I said, "when you invested in Neighborhood Choice, you didn't ask whether I approved either." The other end of the line was silent for a long time. "You've changed," he said. 3 months ago, you wouldn't have done something like this. 3 months ago, I thought we were friends." Another silence. "Are we enemies now?" "No," I said. "We're businessmen." A businessman's relationship isn't held together by emotions, but by interests. That's what you taught me. He hung up the phone. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. My heart was pounding. Not from nervousness, it was because I was finally no longer afraid. The Iris from my past life, who waited for death in a rented apartment, would never have imagined that one day she'd be going head-to-head with someone managing a $300 million fund. At 30, she died. At 25, she was just beginning to live. In May 2020, Old Times officially launched. Leo's execution exceeded my expectations. With my 1.2 million yuan, he built a minimalist yet highly efficient trading platform, sourcing upstream from overseas buyers and driving traffic downstream through Xiaohongshu and Douyin. In the first month, GMV broke 2 million. Julian didn't come looking for me again. But from inside intel, I learned he had invested in a second-hand luxury project called Luxturn, clearly aimed at Old Times. He and I were now in open opposition. Mira was a bit worried. "Iris, Julian's fund has 300 million. How much do you have? Going head-to-head isn't worth it." "No head-to-head," I said. "Let him fight a price war if he wants. The core of Old Times isn't price, it's trust. Leo's appraisal system is the real barrier." In June, Twilight completed its Series B funding round, valued at 500 million. My 1.25% stake became 6.25 million. Combined with my equity in Old Times and returns from the Serena brand, my total assets surpassed 8 million. From 100,000 to 8 million, in a year and a half. But the good times didn't last long. In July, the market suddenly shifted. The state introduced new regulations on community group buying, imposing strict requirements on platform subsidies and data compliance. 3 of Wigwam city warehouses were suspended from operations due to qualification issues, causing daily orders to plummet from 80,000 to 30,000. Derek was so anxious that a ring of blisters broke out around his mouth. Even worse, the Series B investors began to pressure Wigwam to lay off staff and cut costs. Julian, as a Series A investor, remained ambiguous in his stance, neither supporting nor opposing the move. "He's waiting," I said to Mira. "Waiting for what?" "Wait for me to slip up." Julian isn't the type to kick someone when they're down, but he's absolutely the type to seize an opportunity to exploit a crisis. He's waiting for Wigwam's valuation to drop, so he can invest more at a low price and dilute my equity. That's the rule of capital, no emotions involved. But the most devastating blow didn't come from outside. One night in early August, Serena called me. "Iris, the kid's in trouble." My heart sank. A batch of fresh grains was found to have excessive aflatoxin levels, and someone has already exposed it on Weibo. The source is our supplier. Recall. Recall immediately. All batches, whether problematic or not, recall every single one. But, the cost of the recall. I'll figure out the cost. Issue an announcement right now, attitude matters more than anything. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness, my palms slick with cold sweat. This hadn't happened in my past life. Mogwai's supply chain had always been stable, never any quality issues. Butterfly effect. My involvement had accelerated Serena's development pace. She had launched her product 3 months earlier than in my memory, and the supplier's vetting process might have been insufficient as a result. This was my fault. The next day, Serena issued a recall notice. Weibo was flooded with criticism. Some called her a heartless merchant, while others argued that the entire fresh pet food industry should be shut down. Old Times also got caught in the crossfire. Leo called me. Iris, someone on the forum is saying Old Times was also funded by you, and they're dragging your name into the mud along with it. Don't respond. Just focus on the product. But. I said don't respond. I hung up the phone. On the hardest night, I sat in the dimly lit office, facing the monthly report Derek had just sent. Orders continued to decline, losses were mounting, and the Series B investors were demanding an emergency shareholder meeting. Mira poured me a glass of water and sat beside me in silence. The phone lit up. A message from Julian. I'll go to the shareholders meeting. You don't need to come. I stared at the line of text, and suddenly felt a sting in my eyes. He was still helping me. Even after we had become rivals. I replied, I'll come myself. Don't be stubborn. Julian, I typed a line, then deleted it and started over. I'm not putting on a brave face. This is my mess, and I'll clean it up myself. He didn't reply. The next day at the shareholders meeting, the Series B investors proposed laying off 40% of the staff and scaling back to 2 core cities. Derek kept his head down and said nothing, clearly already convinced. I stood up. No layoffs. No scaling back. Ms. Iris, your stake doesn't give you the power to veto this proposal. The Series B investor representative adjusted his glasses. I know. But there's something I have that you don't. I pulled a document from my bag. The Glimmer supply chain compliance overhaul plan. I had my team work on it 3 months ago. If executed according to this plan, Glimmer can pass the new regulatory review within 2 months and restore full operations of all city warehouses. The meeting room fell silent. Julian sat in the corner, watching me. How do you know there will be new regulations? Asked the Series B representative. Trend assessment, I said. It's the same trend assessment I used a year ago to predict the community group buying boom. You invested in Dim Light precisely because you trusted that judgment, didn't you? He stared at me for a long moment. What if it doesn't pass review within 2 months? All of my equity holdings will be transferred to the fund at 80% of the Series B valuation. The whole table gasped. 6.25 million, at 20% off, 5 million. All in. Julian suddenly spoke up, seconded. Everyone looked at him. I led Twilight Series A round. I trust Iris's judgment. His tone was calm. 2 months. The shareholders meeting adjourned. Walking out of the conference room, I stopped at the end of the hallway, leaned against the wall, and took a deep breath. Julian came over, stood beside me, silent. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me. He looked out the window. If you can't pass the review in 2 months, your equity is gone. I only helped you get a chance, not cover for you. I know. Good that you know. He paused. I've heard about what happened at Old Times. What are you planning to do about Serena? Recall, compensation, switch suppliers, start over. What about the money? Figure it out. He was silent for a moment, then pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. This guy is really good at building supply chain traceability systems. He knows the compliance standards for the pet food industry better than anyone. Go to him and mention my name. I took the business card. Julian, whose side are you on, really? He turned his head to look at me. The light from the floor-to-ceiling window fell across his face, a line between light and shadow. I'm on the side that wins. He walked away. I clenched the business card in my hand and suddenly laughed. The winning side. Then I'd show him what winning looks like. The next 2 months were the busiest of my life. By day, I oversaw the restructuring of Glimmer's supply chain. By night, I handled the aftermath of Serena's recall. Mira said I'd lost weight. Derek said my eyes were bloodshot. The man Julian introduced was named Damon, in his early 40s, who had spent 15 years working on food safety traceability. After reviewing Serena's supply chain, he identified 3 critical flaws in just half a day. Your supplier is a contract manufacturer, and you don't have audit rights over their raw material procurement. That means you're handing over your lifeline to someone else, Damon said. You need to build your own quality control system, or at least station inspectors at the factory. What about the cost? Serena asked. About $300,000 up front. $300,000, I no longer have that much cash on hand. The equity in Weiguang can't be touched, the 2-month review period isn't over yet, and a pledge would affect the equity structure. Old Times is still in the money-burning phase, and Leo's books aren't looking good either. I went through every ledger I have, and the only liquid cash I can muster is $120,000. That leaves $180,000 short. In the end, it was Mira who spoke up. I have $180,000, she said. Saved up over 3 years of work. I was planning to use it for a down payment. I looked at her, at a loss for words. Don't look at me like that, she rolled her eyes. It's not like I'm giving it to you for free. Consider it my investment in Mahaizi, 0.5%. Mira. Save the bullshit. Sign it. That evening, I sat alone in the office, staring at Julian's WeChat chat window on my phone. After thinking for a long time, I typed a line and sent it. Damon is amazing, thank you. He replied with a single word, Then he sent another, how's the Glimmer review going? Smoothly, I'll submit the materials next week. Confident? 70%. And the remaining 30%? A gamble. He didn't reply. The next morning, Weiguang officially submitted its compliance review materials. Derek personally visited all city warehouses to ensure every aspect met the new regulations. During the 2 weeks of waiting, I barely got a full night's sleep. September 17, 3:14 p.m. Mira burst into the office, holding up her phone. We passed. All city warehouses are back in operation. Derek shot up from his chair and grabbed Vince in a hug, nearly knocking him over. I stood still, letting out a long, deep breath. The phone rang. Julian. Congratulations. Thank you. What about Old Times? And the plushie? The recall for the plushie is already handled, we switched suppliers and it'll relaunch next month. Old Times GMV broke 5 million last month, and Leo is preparing for the Series A round. Your scope is getting bigger, he said. Not big enough. How much do you want? I thought for a moment, then said, I want to sit at that table, like you all, and be qualified to discuss whether to invest in a project. Not as a consultant, as an investor. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then you need your own fund. I know. Do you know what it takes to run a fund? Money, track record, and credibility. You have the track record and credibility. As for the money, I can help you. Why are you helping me? I told you, I side with whoever's going to win. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. From outside the window came the sound of car horns, distant yet close. Julian. Have you ever thought that I might lose? I have, he said. But you won't. That night, I lay in bed tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Not because of anxiety, but because something inside me was swelling. Swelling until my chest ached. Iris from my past life, at 30, died with nothing. No money, no one, nothing to show for it. 25-year-old Iris has a glimmer of light, her fur babies, Old Times, Mira, Derek, and Serena. And Julian. Though I'm still not sure what he counts as. In October 2020, Old Times completed its series of funding round, with a valuation of $120 million. Julian's fund didn't invest in the competitor this time, instead, it proactively approached Leo. Julian wants to invest in Old Times, Leo told me over the phone. Did you agree? I asked. Not yet. I want to ask you first. I thought it over and said, let him invest. But on the condition that his fund doesn't invest in old times direct competitors at the same time. Are you sure? Sure. Julian didn't object to the condition. In fact, when he signed the investment agreement, he crossed out the competitive investment restriction clause right in front of me, and then rewrote an even stricter version. Your version is too lenient, he said. It has more loopholes than the windows in my office. Do you think I can't get anything right? I think you can get everything right, but you don't understand legal clauses. Then teach me. He glanced at me. Are you serious? I'm serious. That afternoon, Julian spent 3 hours meticulously explaining to me, one by one, the meanings of the clauses in the investment agreement. Liquidation preference, anti-dilution, drag-along rights, tag-along rights, repurchase clauses. He explained them earnestly, like a teacher instructing a student. But he wasn't a teacher, and I wasn't a student. The game between us had never stopped. It had only shifted from open confrontation to an undercurrent contest. Whoever flinched first would lose. In November, Shimmer completed its Series C funding round with a valuation of $1.5 billion. My 1.25% stake was now worth $18.75 million. Combined with my shares in Old Times and Furry Kids, my total assets had surpassed $30 million. And after switching suppliers and rebuilding the quality control system, Furry Kids sales in its first month back on the market had already recovered to the level before the recall. Serena posted a photo. She was squatting in the factory workshop, holding a bag of fresh pet food in her hands, her eyes curving into crescent moons as she smiled. The caption had only 4 words: "The Furry Kid is back." In December, I made a decision. I was going to set up my own fund. Julian helped me a lot, but his help had its boundaries. That boundary was, I was always on his chessboard, never sitting across from him. Are you sure? He sat across from me, holding a cup of untouched coffee in his hand. Sure. Do you know what an independent fund means? Without the backing of a major fund or a seasoned team, LPs won't trust a newcomer with only a year and a half of experience. That's why I need you. He raised an eyebrow. It's not your money I need, I said. It's your credibility. Be my LP, put in $10 million. You don't have to manage anything, I just need your name on the LP list. You want to use my name to raise funds. I want to leverage your credit endorsement. He stared at me for a long time. Iris, do you know what your greatest strength is? What? You always know what you want, and you're never afraid to ask for it. So, will you agree? He took a sip of the coffee that had been sitting for a long time. Yes. In March 2021, Iris Capital was officially registered. The first fund reached $50 million, with Julian's fund subscribing $10 million as the cornerstone LP. The remaining capital came from my personal investment and a few family offices I got to know through Julian. The day after the fund was established, Julian asked to meet at the coffee shop in Guamao 3. The same coffee shop, the same seat as 2 years ago. 2 years ago, you sat here and told me that an outsider's luck is worth more than an insider's judgment. He stirred his coffee. Are you still an outsider now? No, I'm not. What are you relying on now? On judgment. He smiled. And luck, I added. He put down his coffee cup and pulled a document from his briefcase. The biggest merger and acquisition deal of the year. An education technology company, valued at $800 million, with a listed company as the buyer, needs a middleman to broker the deal. I was planning to handle it myself, but... But what? But I want to find a partner. I stared at the document, my heart racing. This was the first time Julian had used the word partner. Not investment advisor, not investment target, not opponent. A partner. What are the conditions? 50-50 split on profits. You handle judging whether a project is worth doing, and I handle execution. Who has the final say? When there's a disagreement, you have the final say. I looked up. He was watching me, with something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not shrewdness, not calculation, not condescension. It was trust. Okay, I said. He reached out his hand. I took it. The same warmth as 2 years ago, dry, slightly heated. But this time, my heartbeat was different. The acquisition took 4 months to complete. During the process, Julian and I argued 3 times, went cold for a week, and then, late one night, suddenly reached a consensus over a single clause. We sat in front of the computer screen, eating takeout until 3 in the morning. The last argument was over the valuation. Julian thought 800 million was reasonable, but I believed 750 million was safer, because the buyer's cash flow wasn't robust, and an 800 million valuation might lead to a failed subsequent performance-based bet. "You're too conservative," he said. "You're too aggressive," I replied. "Iris, when did you become so risk-averse? The first time you met me, you put all 100,000 on a college student. Back then, I only had 100,000. I could afford to lose it. It's different now." "How is it different?" I looked at him, suddenly unable to speak. What was different? Probably because back then, there was only me. Now there's Mira behind me, Derek, Serena, Leo. And him. "Because losing hurts now," I said. He fell silent. In the end, the buyer accepted the 750 million valuation, and the acquisition went through smoothly. Subsequent events proved my judgment was right. 6 months later, the buyer's cash flow did run into problems. If we had bet on an 800 million valuation with a performance clause, they would most likely have defaulted. Julian brought this up at a dinner party once, a little tipsy, and said to the whole table, "Iris, her greatest strength is that she knows exactly when to back down and never forces it." Mira was laughing uncontrollably beside me. I held my glass and said nothing. December 31st, 2021. Iris Capital had been established for 9 months, with assets under management growing from 50 million to 120 million. Welight initiated IPO preparations, with an expected listing in 2023. Mahaizi completed its Series B funding round at a valuation of 600 million. Jiaxiguang was valued at 300 million, ranking first among vertical platforms for second-hand luxury goods trading. From 100,000 to 120 million, 2 years. That night, I sat alone in the office, watching the fireworks outside the window. My phone rang. "Julian. Happy New Year." "Happy New Year. Want to grab a bite?" "It's too late. Tomorrow, then." "Okay." After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. In her past life, 30-year-old Iris died in a rented room in winter. No heat, no money, no one. Her final thought wasn't regret, but, what if? What if she had dared to take a risk back then? What if she hadn't been afraid of losing? What if she had lived as herself? Now, she had done it. 25-year-old Iris had started with 100,000 yuan and, step by step, made it all the way here. Not because of rebirth. Not because of memories. It was because she finally dared to. In the spring of 2022, Weiguang submitted its prospectus to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Julian arranged to meet me at Blue Bay Coffee. It was the same cafe where Derek had held his roadshow 3 years ago. Now, it had changed owners, been completely renovated, and turned into a trendy Instagram hotspot. "You know," Julian sat across from me, "the day you walked into this cafe 3 years ago, I asked another friend of Derek's about you." "I know." "You know? The message you sent that day sounded like someone who'd done a background check." I smiled. Besides, a fund manager handling 3 billion wouldn't just randomly know that an office clerk went to a road show. He was stunned for a moment, then laughed. "Then why did you still dare to bet with me?" "Because even though you're arrogant, that message about fixing the loophole was genuine. An arrogant but honest person is worth betting on." He looked at me, and that expression I was getting more and more familiar with appeared in his eyes again. "Iris." "After Glimmer goes public, your net worth will be over 100 million. You won't need my endorsement anymore." "Then what kind of relationship will we have from now on?" I looked down and stirred my coffee. "What kind of relationship do you want it to be?" He was silent for a moment, then said something I hadn't expected. "I want to take the next step with you. Not as an investor, and not as a partner." I looked up. He was staring back at me, dead serious. "As what?" "You decide." The sunlight outside was just right, casting its glow across his face. I thought back to that winter in my past life, to myself in that rented room. Cold. Lonely. Desperate. She never would have dreamed that one day, she'd be sitting in a cafe, being asked a question like that by someone like him. Julian. Yeah. Do you know what my biggest trait is? What? I never follow anyone, I said. His eyes darkened for a moment. But I can take people away. He froze for 2 seconds. Then he laughed, a laugh more genuine than any I'd seen from him in the past 3 years. All right. On the day Glimmer went public, Derek rang the bell at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Mira was sobbing uncontrollably in the audience, her makeup completely ruined. Serena and Leo sat in the spectator seats, phones in hand, snapping pictures frantically. I stood in the corner, watching the stock prices jump on the big screen. Julian walked over to me, his shoulder brushing against mine. Nervous? Not at all. Liar. Your hands are shaking. I looked down at my hand clutching my phone. It was indeed trembling. All right, maybe a little. He took my hand. Dry, warm. Just like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But this time I didn't let go. On the big screen, Wigwang's stock price kept climbing. I suddenly remembered the thought I had before dying in my past life. What if I had dared to take a gamble back then? I gambled. Not just on the project, on the money, on my career. I gambled on a person too. I won. I won everything. Later, someone asked me, what was the single best decision you ever made in your life? I thought about it, and said, it wasn't investing in Glimmer, and it wasn't winning the bet against Julian. What is it? It was the winter when I was 25, the day I pushed open the door of Blue Bay Coffee. Outside the door was Beijing at -3 degrees Celsius, inside, a 25-year-old entrepreneur was giving an impromptu pitch, and in my hand was the notice for my 100,000 yuan year-end bonus. After that door swung open, nothing was ever the same. I still remember the light that afternoon. The glass door of the cafe was fogged with mist, and as I reached out to push it open, my fingertips touched the cold metal handle. In that moment, I suddenly understood something. Rebirth isn't about living a second time. It's about finally daring to live as yourself.